Hello friends, and welcome back to the Citizen Geek channel. I am your Citizen Geek, Maddie G, and today I am going to be sharing my thoughts with you on the film Bridge of Spies. Bridge of Spies was directed by Steven Spielberg. The film tells the true story of James Donovan, a lawyer who during the Cold War was given the unenviable task of defending alleged Russian spy Rudolf Abel. Now, while he ultimately lost the trial, both because of the fact that it was basically a sham and everybody wanted to convict him, they just wanted to make it look like the US actually cared whether or not he got a fair trial, and in part because Abel was in fact guilty of being a Russian spy. Donovan is later brought back into the government's fold when the government asks him to act as the mediator between an exchange that's going to happen between the United States, Russia, and eventually East Germany. One of our American spies ended up being shot down over Russian territory and had been captured by the Russian government. Because each government worried that the prisoner the other one had was eventually going to give up their secrets, it was eventually left up to Donovan to find a way to navigate through all the tricky political waters of each government and find a way to negotiate a mutually beneficial trade-off between each government. Now initially this was just supposed to be between the Russians and the Americans, but eventually East Germany got involved because, as it turns out, East Germany also ended up capturing a supposed American spy. It turned out he wasn't actually a spy, he was just some poor college kid over there that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And while the CIA initially wants nothing to do with that, Donovan kind of ends up making it his own personal mission to find a way of getting both American prisoners of war home in exchange for the Russian one. Bridge of Spies sees Spielberg working in a mode very similar to his recent film Lincoln. This is very much a film about dialogue, both in terms of what's being spoken and in terms of dialogue between different people and nations and cultures and things of that nature. The Cold War was very much a war of words, but everyone was really worried that eventually somebody would say something wrong or screw something up and we'd end up in a catastrophic nuclear war that would destroy everything. As this movie shows, they even showed these ridiculous videos called Duck and Cover, which told kids that if a nuclear warhead should suddenly burst over their house, they just needed to duck under a table and everything would be fine. Just for the record, that does not work. At least I assume it doesn't. I haven't been in that situation yet. For the most part, the battles in this film are being fought with words instead of weapons, and in this regard, Hanks' Donovan is easily the most skilled warrior in the room. Being a lawyer, he is exceptionally good at getting people to see both sides of a situation or finding a way to navigate around whatever issues the other person has and finding a way to word something in just the right way that will be able to bring somebody around to his particular point of view or that will help him get what he's looking for. It's interesting to watch how initially Donovan didn't want any part of this, but he was so good at his job and believed so much in people having the right to a fair trial that he ends up taking it anyway, which ends up for a while making him one of the most hated men in America, almost even more so than the actual Russian spy. People on the street look at him as a traitor. His family doesn't really understand why he's doing it at first. At one point somebody even shoots out the windows of his house just to freak him out. This all kind of feeds into one of the biggest ideas behind Spielberg's movie, and Spielberg has actually done this a few times in different movies, probably most notably Munich. So many times when we look at war movies, it's usually portrayed as one side being ultimately good and one side being ultimately bad. But most of the time, pretty much all the time, that's not what war is. And Spielberg is showing that. He shows that when it came to the Cold War, both the US government and the Russian government were basically doing the same things, and in fact calling each other out on it. Everybody in America is shown as hating Rudolf Abel because they believe that he's, a monster, that he's working to destroy the US, but at the same time it shows we were sending spies over to Russia too. And in fact, we were actually telling our spies to kill themselves before they ended up getting caught. This is not a typical war movie in that regard. Now, I will say this about Bridge of Spies. It's a very slow-paced movie. Spielberg is not afraid to make this a movie that's very slow and also very toned down. This is not a movie where people are grandstanding all the time or spouting big, full-on, patriotic speeches or whatever. Most of the time, it's just people in a room talking relatively quietly, just trying to figure out what each one wants and how they can get it. Well, I was certainly fine with this and actually found it very engaging and interesting. I have a feeling that quite a few casual film goers are probably going to find it more than a little boring, especially given that it runs about 2.5 hours. When it came to writing the screenplay, Spielberg actually got an assist from the Coen brothers, and there are times when you can definitely see their imprint on the script, especially during the funny parts. For being a movie about such a serious topic, Bridge of Spies is actually often pretty funny. In fact, there's one moment involving a surprise F-bomb drop that had the audience I was watching it with probably laughing for about a full-on minute. Because Spielberg and the Coen brothers and Tom Hanks and the rest of the actors all give the characters enough personal depth and interesting dialogue, I found myself really invested in these people and finding out what eventually happened and how things worked out, because I didn't know the true story of what actually happened. I had no idea who these people were before the movie, and so finding out what happened and that this all actually happened when most people not knowing about it was really interesting. I always like movies that tell different sides of a story or tell little stories that went on during a big event that no one knew about. I kind of felt the same way about Argo. This movie at times reminded me of a few other classic Cold War spy movies, especially ones based on John le Carre novels, like, for example, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, or Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Those are other movies where being a spy is shown as not being all like super like James Bondy or like Bourne Supremacy, you know, action, girls, sex, all that stuff. That's not the way it really was. And like those films, Bridge of Spies really kind of shows what the real side of being a spy was like. It's not flashy, but it's definitely interesting. I also really enjoyed the score of this film, which was done by Thomas Newman. I think this is actually the first time he's collaborated with Spielberg, but he's been one of my favorite composers for a long time. He has a very particular style, and I can almost always point out at some point when it's a Thomas Newman score. There was actually a point in this movie where I heard it and was like, this is a Thomas Newman score, isn't it? And then I got to the end and I saw the credits and I'm like, yep, Thomas Newman, thought so. It's a beautiful score and it really fits the movie well. Overall, I thought Bridge of Spies did a really great job at telling an interesting story that I had never heard of before. It's also a very unique take on kind of the spy film genre. And while I definitely think there are some people who are going to find it a bit slow and a bit too low-key, if you're not afraid of watching a movie that's a little slow-paced and is more about dialogue than action, I definitely recommend checking out Bridge of Spies. It's a really great film, and probably some of the best work that both Spielberg and Hanks have done in their respective careers. Alright guys, thanks very much for joining me here again on Citizen Geek. Thanks for all your support. If you like what I do, please continue to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment below, let me know what you thought of this video, let me know what you thought of Bridge of Spies if you saw it. What are some of your favorite war movies or Spielberg movies or Hanks movies? Take care, and I will see you again real soon.